Hello, so here we are at the mash tun. Last time we were speaking about the milling, where you create some grist that has 70-20-10 split of starch granules and husks and flour. So that grist comes over through from the roller mill, and it actually gets pumped up through this auger, which you may or may not be able to see up there. And it feeds into this unit called a Steels masher. And what this is doing is it takes those grits and it mixes them in a very aggressive way with the hot water also coming into the mash tun at the same time. So that gives you like super contact between water and the grits, okay? Then they get deposited into the mash tun. Now the mash tun is probably the single most complicated step in any brewery or distillery, because what you're trying to do is extract the sugars, the starch, and the enzymes without denaturing the enzymes, okay? And so it's a very complicated step because you want to form a natural filter bed inside with all those husks and lumps of starch. And you want that filter bed to basically filter the wort until it's nice and clear. So there's a very challenging step here. And that's why it's so important to have that 70-20-10 ratio in the grits, because you don't want too much flour, otherwise this might get stuck, okay? Which means it won't filter and someone's climbing in there to dig it out, okay? So the grits come in through the Steels masher, loads up into the mash tun, and the mash tun, for the first water, we have a gentle heat of 65 degrees. And what that 65 degrees is going to do when it contacts the grist is it's going to start to dissolve some of those starch lumps, the grits, right? And it's going to dissolve the flour, the starch flour, and any sugar that's there. And critically, it will start to extract the enzymes, okay? Now, but we want a nice clear wort. And so what will happen is, when we show you inside this mash tun in a minute, you're going to see there's some rakes in there. And what happens is, when we load up the 65 degree water with the grist, we do one revolution of the rakes, and then we'll leave it for an hour to settle so it can start to form this bed, okay, this natural filter bed, using the husks that are already in the grist. Now, to create that filter bed, to make it more effective, after the one rotation of the rakes, we then start vorlaufing. And what that means is you're actually taking water out the bottom of the mash tun and recirculating it back through the top. And there's a bunch of spray heads inside. And so it gently sprays this wort back onto the bed, and then it vorlaufs through the bed, gets recycled back up to top. And you keep running that, could be 10, 20 minutes, to continue to settle the bed, but until you get a clear wort. Dr. Jim Swan said, no cloudy wort, must be clear. And so once you've got the clear wort, then you can send that wort to the fermenter, ready for the fermentation. Now that's the first water that we're doing, okay? And like I said, 65 degrees, nice and gentle, collects the enzymes without the enzymes being denatured. But the starch lumps are still there. They're too difficult to break down. So then we add a second water, 75 degrees. Now you're going to start to break down the starch lumps a bit more. Same process, bit of vorlaufing, and then once you got clear wort, send that water through. Now, at that point, you've collected all the enzymes safely without denaturing them at a high temperature. You've got all your sugar, and you've got most of the starch at this point, okay? But the Scots being the Scots, we like to get our value for money. And so at this point, we add a third water to guarantee that we squeeze every little ounce of starch out. Not much left at this point, but we use a third water way up at 95 degrees. Enzymes don't have a chance of surviving that. But the starch granules, if there's any left, will absolutely get dissolved at that point. So you go from 65 degrees, 75 degrees to 90 or 95 degrees hot water, okay? But that third water is too much water to add to the fermenter. Only the first two waters go to the fermenter. And that third water we actually collect in one of these ancillary tanks here. And we keep that hot water, it was at 90, 95 degrees, we keep that available for the next day's mashing. And that becomes the water number one for the next day. Has maybe a tiny little bit of starch in it, but we want to save that starch. So it's kind of a, it's like a ecologically, recycling, if you will. So for the spent barley in there, all those husks that's left in there, we also recycle that. And we actually discharge it out the bottom of the mash tun, collect it in bins, and we give it for free to the local farmers. And they actually use it as cattle feed or pig feed, right? And it's a high protein diet, no sugar left, no starch left, pure protein in the husks and whatnot. So that's a great way of recycling from breweries and distilleries. So if you want to come and have a look in here, and we'll just get this, we'll get the rakes going. I'm just working the PLC here. So if you're able to have a look in there, you'll see the rakes. And like I said, when you load up the mash tun with the grist in the hot water, the 65 degrees, you'll just give it one rotation of the rakes. And that's just to make sure full contact has happened, okay? And then once you've done that, then you would stop the rakes you stop the rakes, and then you would start doing the vorleifing where the water sprays in from the top. I don't know if the camera can get the angle there to see the sprays around the top of the mash tun or not. But that's where you do the vorleifing, you spray from the top there. Okay, so, and then you'll notice at the bottom, there's a false bed there, like it's like a sieve bed. And so the water slips through that bed and leaves all of the husks behind. And so that's how you collect the clear wort, if you will, through that filter bed, right, that sieve at the bottom, yeah? So that's the process. It's very, very complicated, the single most complicated process in a brewery or a distillery. And hopefully that gives you some great insights into how we do it.